Yo guys, what is going on, and welcome back to the next episode of my NQT Diaries show. So, it's been a couple of weeks, I'm very aware, and I apologise for not putting out more content sooner and updating you on how my last couple of weeks have gone. But on the weekends, which is the main time I get to film, over the last couple of weekends I've had lots of Jitsu events going on and unfortunately have been unable to get in front of the camera. But nonetheless, back, and today we're going to talk a little bit about what I've been up to over the last couple of weeks and how I am doing in the lead up to half term. So guys, without further ado, let's get into the video. Alright guys, so as I said, unfortunately I've not been able to record. As you will hopefully know if you have watched some of my previous footage from my previous videos, you will have seen that I am training for my second degree black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. Because of that, I have lots of training that I need to go through in order to be ready for it come July. Grading's second weekend of July, so yeah, I've got lots of training going on at the moment, travelling up to Birmingham, a couple of weeks going up to Manchester, and for those reasons and those excuses, I've not been able to record. So we have a reasonable amount to get through. I'm going to basically bring it all into one neat, hefty package to talk about what I've been up to. So one of the biggest things is I had another observation. In fact, I had two more observations, primarily because the first one didn't go as well as I had intended, and fortunately for me, the head gave me the opportunity to for him to come and observe me a second time and to sort of keep the record going strong. My first observations back in my first and second term, so September and then just before Christmas, they were both really good, and he had some constructive criticism, but for the most part they were very positive. And then the third one, although I felt like it was a good lesson, the head definitely felt as though there was room for improvement, and he suggested that he'd come in and observe me the week after, so I can think about some of the comments that he'd made in order for me to improve and to keep my record nice and clean. Yeah. Now, obviously, everyone is going to have a bad or an observation that didn't go as well as they intended, and obviously it's never a nice thing. I am very much my own worst critic when it comes to things like that, but it was really cool of him to have given me the opportunity to have had another go. Obviously, the first observation would be recorded. You know, he said he was going to record it, but it wasn't going to get sent off to the council, essentially. And as an NQT, what happens is you have one observation per half term. So throughout the entire school year, you have 6 in total. And the 2nd, 4th, and 6th, so the end of every full term, your observation gets sort of sent off properly along with a report to the council to say whether or not you're achieving what you are supposed to be achieving at that point in the year. And then hopefully, assuming that all of your observations have met the standards that you need to be a qualified teacher, then you pass your NQT year. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. The lesson I did was on poetry. Some might consider that to be quite a risky topic to do an observation on, but nonetheless, it was something that I was doing with my class at the time, and you know, I felt as though it only right to teach what I would normally have been teaching for an observation, rather than setting it up in such a way that I would probably come across stronger and get a better observation, but it be a false picture of my teaching. So yeah, I've not properly taught poetry before, so actually it being a slightly more not as stronger lesson observation makes plenty of sense, because I've not actually done much poetry in school, and actually what it meant is that I could really reassess and reevaluate what I was teaching and how I was teaching it, and yeah, essentially make sure that my teaching was strong in order for the children to develop. So one thing that I found really useful was I went to the literacy head, who is the Year 5/6 teacher, asked her for some advice, and she gave me a 5 step-by-step guide on like how I can break down poetry with the children, how I can get them to analyse it and review it, and that really helped. And then when my second observation came around, I did much better. I'm still waiting on some feedback for it, but when I get the feedback I can assess again where I need to improve. Now, if you're watching this and you have had a slightly negative observation, one thing that I constantly try to remember, and one thing that I was told a lot when I was doing my PGCE, is just remember that the observations are that you're being observed on your teaching. It's not them observing you as an individual, as a person. They're observing your teaching. It might be a case that you're just not very strong in that area and you just generally need to improve on your subject knowledge. It could be a case that you had a bad day and it was just one of those things, or it could be that you didn't put enough effort into your planning. Either way, wherever obviously there are slight holes in your teaching practice, that will usually come up in an observation, which for me, it was my subject knowledge and my understanding of how to teach the children poetry. But because of that, I then learned these 5 steps of how to break down poetry for children, and I probably wouldn't have had that, or possibly wouldn't have had that conversation with my with the literacy lead had I not have had a slightly more negative observation. That, and actually it makes you reflect on your teaching as a whole, so can't be a bad thing. So one thing that is new is that I have recently had a bit of a change around in the adults in my class. So I've got the 2 TAs that I've had ever since September, and then after Christmas I had another lady who has been working at the school for about 4 years, I believe. She's fantastic, and she's been in my class supporting one of the other boys that are in my class, and they've worked closely together in the past. Now, unfortunately, and it's very sad, but she's moving on. She's, I think, going down to Wales. She's moving on from the school, and she's taking her son, who was also in my class, with her, and therefore the child that she was working with doesn't have that one-to-one support anymore. Now, I have worked with him without the one-to-one support, and he definitely is better when he is that additional support. And so what's happened is another adult has come into the class. This adult is also a parent of one of the children, and she's supporting him really well. I don't think she's done a job like this before, and so she's a bit new to it, but she's been supported by me and the other TAs and obviously the rest of the teachers in the school. But so far she's seeming to be a good influence on this child. And yeah, this last week, on Friday especially, we had our big assembly, and he got so many awards, head teacher awards. He got gold stars because he's really spent the last week really focused, and I do think a big part of the reason is because of this slight changing of adult. I don't think it's specifically because of the change of adult so much, but yeah, it's a good thing. So if you have a change of adult in your class, that can be beneficial, but it also can be detrimental in certain circumstances. So the reason it can be detrimental is dependent on lots of different variables. And actually, I had an NQT meeting a couple of weeks ago where we discussed how detrimental different adults can be, and it all depends on the child's previous experiences and encounters, right? So one of the things that got brought up in this NQT meeting that I had was that things like the way that an adult looks, the way that they smell, the clothes they might wear, the way they walk, their general demeanour and how they hold themselves, their body language, this can all affect children. Now, I'm fortunate that being in a Year 3/4 class, I have children that are all able to, within reason, communicate more effectively to me and the other adults, and therefore if there are problems, we are able to talk to them, and they can, for most of them at least, they can express how they're feeling. But for younger children that maybe struggle to express their emotions and how they're feeling, things like a change of adult, a change of sense, a change of smell, it can really have a big impact on your child and on the child's behaviour. So, like I say, it can be detrimental, because if a new adult comes in and let's say something like aftershave or perfume, and it reminds that child, even subconsciously, they don't realise it, but it reminds them of a time in their past that wasn't particularly nice, they can start getting distressed. That can affect their behaviour. There's lots of things that can kind of come together. So just be aware of that when you are introducing new adults to your class, because it can have detrimental effects. Something that also happened, which I wasn't involved in because I was on my PPA, but I spoke to the chap that came in afterwards, is the whole school, I think excluding the year 6s, I'm not really sure why, but there must have been a reason. The whole school had the police come in to talk to them about internet safety. Now I've done a lesson on internet safety with my class before, you know, trying to make sure that they're aware of the dangers that lie in the internet and using the internet, especially social media sites, but also things like, you know, use of email and telephone, all sorts of internet related safety talk. And the police were talking to them about, you know, trying to put it at their age. And one thing that the officer said that I found really interesting was the way that they go about teaching the children about internet safety is to see what they use that is on the internet, you know. So I'm in a class now where most children have access to the internet, but to varying levels. So there are some children that have access to certain social media sites like WhatsApp and Snapchat. Others don't have any access whatsoever. And then there are some that are in between, and you know, they have a tablet but they're only allowed to read or watch a bit of YouTube and so on and so forth. A lot of games and apps have age ratings for a specific reason, because children shouldn't be exposed to the content that's on them. It could be vivid, it could be violent, there could be certain language that's used that's not appropriate. It's no surprise that some children go into school using bad language or using language that they have witnessed or they've heard in a game, not realising actually that it's bad language and they shouldn't be using it. So there were a few children in my class that came back. Fortunately, none of them were involved or watching or playing video games or watching videos that were too above their age range. Apparently, according to the officer, like I say, I spoke to him in my lunch break, he was saying that my class was quite sensible. They were coming up with some fantastic ideas, and it was interesting. I briefly got to sit in on the class whilst they were playing a video, and the video that were playing was all about, imagine you were in the video game yourself and this character came up to you and tried to take you somewhere. Would you go with them? You know, would you like tell them all your details? Would you do this? Would you do that? And obviously most of the children were like, no, that's silly, you know, stranger danger. Well, it's exactly the same if you're behind a computer screen. You know, you don't know who's on the other end. If you're playing with other people on the internet, you don't know who is also there. So it was interesting. If you're watching this, I would definitely suggest trying to get someone in. Obviously do internet safety yourself as a teacher, but having the police come in and talk to the children definitely hit another chord with them. They definitely changed their tone when they were talking with the police officers. Yeah, it was interesting. So yeah, good for the children to experience. The last thing that I want to talk about, and I will recap this again with you guys next week, is that one of the things that we had recently, we had a lady come in from, I believe she works for the council, to look and talk about to us about our science, how we run our science, and as possible future science lead at the school, I was quite interested to hear what she had to say and how she suggested we teach science to the children across the entire school. And having had a science background myself, I've got very clear goals on how I want to teach science to the children and how I want the children to be working, ultimately scientifically, thinking about the processes of science, how science works, and this spans across all types of science if we're talking general rules for science. And so she came back in, this lady came back in to see how we were doing, how our science working walls were looking, or how our books were looking, and she was happy by what she saw in my books, which was great. It was lovely to hear. I got some very positive feedback, which was fantastic. And one of the things that I've been doing with the children in science at the moment is working with electricity. And We've done lots of electricity. I've spoken about electrical safety. We've looked at circuits, appliances. We've done quite a lot looking at electricity, how it's generated, and the children are really engaged with it. We've played with batteries and wires, and we've connected things up, made light bulbs go off, made buzzers buzz. And yeah, it's really insightful to see how children work with electricity in this way. And one thing I'm doing at the moment, which the children are loving, is I decided that we were going to use electricity to make something work. So we were going to actually create a circuit to make something work. And what I've done is we've created toy cars, essentially, remote control cars. Well, not remote control, but control cars using electrical circuits and motors. So I managed to get in some shape there, creating 3D structures, making the chassis, pardon me, of this car. I obviously had to plug into them about design and tech, the use of saws, the use of specific wood. We were using glue and all sorts of different things like that. And they were creating these structures. Did a bit of art because I asked them to design it. And we obviously looked at the design and what implements they needed to be able to create this car. And then this week, just because of having 20 odd children creating these cars has taken quite a while. And then this next week, what we'll be doing is we'll be creating circuits for them, and they'll be able to work their own car. So yeah, one thing I will say, and I'm glad I did this, is if you're going to do something practical like this, and I'm sure I've said this before in my previous shows, NQT shows, is make sure that whatever you're doing, if it's going to be practical and you're going to excite the children and really get them worked up about it, make sure you've tested it yourself. Because there's nothing worse than building a child's hopes up, them thinking, oh yes, this is so exciting, my car's going to work, or you know, this experiment is going to look like this and it's going to be spectacular. And there are certain things that you've neglected to realise, or you know, you've not measured something properly, or in my case, the batteries weren't powerful enough, so actually the car didn't move properly. So I spent an evening or two after school making my own little car and testing the circuits to make sure it worked. And to start off with, it didn't, and I was like, this is a nightmare. Like, if I build the children up and they've got these cars and then they don't actually work, they're going to be distraught. And so I played with it, I tested it, I pulled different things about, I tried different wires, different motors, I cut the car down so it was smaller, tried to lose some of the weight, gain some of the weight, and in the end, fortunately, it was just a case that the battery I was using was out of date, and I needed a stronger battery. And then when I did that, the car was away, and it was going off, and it was travelling just fine. So this week I will have to use the same batteries because we only have the one. But this week we will then be going into that. So yeah, make sure you do practicals with your children because they're children and it's really a good way for them to learn by practical hands-on stuff. But also make sure that you test out what you're going to do with them to prevent you from getting a headache and lots of children disappointed and upset that it didn't work. That's one of my top tips. Okay guys, so I'm going to wrap this video up here. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. As I said, I do apologise that I haven't put any content out for the last 2 weeks. But life gets busy and I've got lots of other ventures that I am involved with at the moment. But nonetheless, I am endeavouring to get these out. Have one more week, then it's half term. I'm going to try and put a bit more footage out over half term. And yeah, I can't wait for half term. It's going to be good. Right guys, well, I'm going to leave it here. So thank you guys for tuning back in. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Hit that like button. If you want to know anything more about what have happened in the last 2 weeks, or if you've got any questions about things I've brought up in this video, comment down below. And as always, to keep up to date with everything I'm putting out, please consider subscribing. Alright guys, see you next time. Peace.